Mark, if your career, your work family let you go, what on earth are you going to do next? Would you be okay? Is there a plan B? So this episode is a crisis as a catalyst for change in your career. And I'm here with Mark Cunningham, founder of Career Buddy, who's exactly the person I wish I had in my career over the years in the choppy, shark-infested waters of navigating when things go wrong. And this happened to me a few times. My name's Simon. I'm co-founder of the Rebel School, and we're all about teaching people how to start a business without spending any money. So between the two of us, we've got lots of ideas, insights, and thoughts for you to be able to help you be purposeful about your next career move. Now, on a previous conversation, we've talked about the comfort zone being a bit of a trap and how we get trapped in comfort. And we talked about having a plan B. We talked about how to prepare for transition and being front foot and being the CEO of your own career. But sometimes there's a crisis. Sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes things happen that are out of your control. And that can be a little bit scary. And one example of that is redundancy. But Mark, give us a sense of what are the kind of crises that you've seen from your clients that experience, if I put it politely, something happen out of left field. Like what's
Yes.
kind of things can happen.
Yeah. Look, thanks, Simon. I'm Mark, founder of Career Buddy. We're a consultancy business focusing on the individual rather than the employer and helping employees face these crises. What, what there's a myriad of different scenarios that can come up, Simon. Obviously, redundancy being one of them. Redundancy, as we kind of touched on in our last episode, can be extremely detrimental to someone's career, and actually much broader than that. It can really knock your self-confidence. It can affect your family and personal relationships. People, back home in Ireland, people have written songs about their life going through the process, and it really strikes a chord with people because being exited from a business is almost being exited from your livelihood. It is, and it's a massive career change and life change. In other circumstances, it doesn't have to be as dramatic as that. Although up to 25% of employers in the UK today are predicting laying people off through redundancy over the next couple of months. A stat that and a commentary that's been prevalent for the last number of months and is ringing true with redundancy being at a 10-year high. But outside of that, a really common area for people to be exited out of businesses is through performance improvement plans. And unfortunately, where redundancy is very well kind of monitored, and there's a distinct process with it, and there's a lot of protections from the employee. When you're exited through performance, it is the rigor can be quite a lot less. So that's something that you can see coming at least, and you'll have a fair bit of runway to be able to kind of plot your next move. But it can be just as daunting. It can be rubbing your lack of achievement in your face, and that can be like almost worse. And look, in some cases that's the business, right? And that's the right decision for the business. And I don't want to say here that there's anything fundamentally wrong with making someone redundant or exiting someone from the business because of a poor performance. In actual fact, not exiting someone from the business when there's poor performance is detrimental to the other employees. So it's not a negative, always a negative thing. But for the individual, if we're leading with empathy and respect, it's can be life-shattering,
Yeah,
and we have to be
really
really
challenging.
cognizant of that.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, look, there can be, harassment. There can be, toxic work culture. There can be discrimination. There can be undue uh, asks of employees to, maybe return to office. I've seen cases previously. We see a lot of that in the media over the last number of months, but there's been cases where employers have shut down offices, asked everyone to go remote, drop of the hat, it's going to change. Actually, we want everyone back in the office. If you're within, 100 or 150-mile radius, you're expected in 3 to 5 days a week, which, depending on where you're living, can be exceedingly challenging. Depending on what your family situation is, it can be even worse. So in certain circumstances, that is the crisis, and it can come in various different forms, as I've alluded to. But it's important to be aware of it and to prepare for if it does arrive at your door.
Oh, this episode sounds terrifying, Mark. So I could be made redundant. I could be put on a performance improvement plan and then exited. I could experience harassment or a toxic workplace culture, or there could be a whole bunch of material changes in the business that make it really difficult for me to come to work. Or if I'm really unlucky, all of those things at once. Now, hopefully that won't happen to anybody, but there's a good number of those that you've been through that are, I'm having a few flashbacks here. Like, I've been through this. I remember earlier in my career, I went through a redundancy process and then applied for one of the few jobs that was being offered in a new company. So basically, the company I was working for lost their only contract. The contract was won by a different business, and we were first put a notice of redundancy, then tupied in. Then I was about to be exited, and then just by the skin of my teeth managed to get a promotion. I got, by the way, just for your amusement, the reason I got that role was because I've really badly screwed up an answer to a question. And just at the end of the interview, when they said, "Is there anything else you want to say?" I said, "That question you asked me earlier, can I have another go at it?" And they went, "Yeah, sure." And I gave a much better answer. And that was the difference. They gave me feedback later. That was the difference between me being hired for that role or made redundant. Fast forward 9 months, the government pulled that contract and I went through the whole process all over again. Except this time I was exited, but not before I'd exited another 50 or 60 people, because that was what the role was that I'd taken on, right? So, but I didn't sign up for that. So that to me felt like a sort of triple crisis over a 12 to 14-month period. And looking back, when I first went through it, I was definitely back foot. I hadn't predicted this at all. And the writing on the wall, it was there, it was coming, right? And but I just hadn't seen it coming. So it did feel very much back foot. Confidence definitely knocked. But going through that process, becoming aware, like much more aware of what's going on and being curious about what the process was that people are going through, that helped me to get informed. And with that information, that meant, okay, so I've got less anxiety now. At least I know what I'm dealing with and what the risks are. You know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
that's when I think about, the different types of crisis that can trigger a career change, whether you like it or not, folks. If one of these things happens, you're probably looking at a career change. Um, let's be as front foot as we can. And what we were talking about before is having that plan B. But if you haven't got a plan B and you're finding yourself in one of these situations, what sort of comes front of mind for you? Obviously, there's legal protection, there's various things that we can do there. But if someone's watching or listening to this thinking, I'm in one of these crises, I've been put on a performance improvement plan, or I'm in a horrible environment, there's toxicity, there's harassment, I don't know what to do. What's your sort of top line kind of thoughts around how to manage that crisis?
Yeah. So there's a few points that will come to mind there. I've been in scenarios personally, and I've witnessed this from clients where that crisis actually comes from within. So the work culture, potentially is high, fast paced. It might be pressurizing. It might be expecting a lot of you. And I wouldn't be sitting here and saying there's anything particularly wrong with that. But I've definitely seen scenarios where, you get caught and people get caught in this rumination of negativity. One action by an employer or one push or is then tarnish the rest of your experience. So the very first thing I would do is take a step back and look at your situation objectively. Try to deal in facts, not feelings, and make sure that you're not making the situation worse. I remember having, been in a period of almost crisis with the previous employer, and I kind of luckily got a bit of a smack in the face by them to say, like, things actually aren't that bad. Like, there's you are putting this pressure on yourself, and I see that with my clients quite a lot. And it's about breaking that negative cycle. Identifying the feeling, naming the feeling, and then trying to process where that feeling is coming from. Now, that is crises of your own doing. There's a hell of a lot of scenarios where that isn't the case, and there's actually genuinely something that is wrong. And when you take a step back, you know if that's the case. And in them scenarios, there's a myriad of different ways you can approach it based on the scenario. But all of them kind of come down to making sure that you're acting clear-headed and acting with purpose, and not sitting back and letting things take the shape of your own career from you.
Yeah, because it's quite shocking, isn't it? I think that I've been in that position of ruminating over things, and I think that's great advice actually. That when a thing happens, is take a deep breath and look after yourself and be as regulated as you can. And I love that. Let's just have a look at the facts rather than get caught up in the emotion of it all. And then
and even if you need to, booking. Look, but I suppose before coming to me, it's important to also like let off some steam. So sometimes that can come from colleagues. I'd be a bit cautious about that though. Depending on the environment you're in, people can take advantage of that and use that to their own to service their own goals and aspirations. So just be cautious about sharing that internally. I'm maybe a little bit reluctant to say the next bit, but don't go to HR. I think I read a stat recently that it's like 40 or 50% of people don't trust their HR department. A comment from a university lecturer when I was first getting into HR always rings true in my mind. And what she said was this: that if you're sitting here in this lecture hall and you're a people person and you're getting into HR because you're a people person, you picked your own profession. You're going to be dealing with policies, procedures, paperwork. People person isn't the one. And I was quite stubborn at the time, and I think I've retained that stubbornness, but I plowed on. But unfortunately, I'm here to tell you she was probably right. And there is good people within HR. There's absolutely good people in HR, but it's outside of their control. Their primary focus is to be to reduce risk for the organization and employee advocacy definitely come second, if not further down the priority list.
So, I mean, let's just touch on the protection for someone that is facing crisis. What sort of measures are there in place that actually look after the employee that can, that you kind of, as part of your role, can raise the awareness of and help people to access? What kind of stuff should they be thinking about as part of that crisis management bit? And then we'll go on to the fun side of a crisis in a minute.
Yeah, so there's loads of free resources out there. So like the best bet that you have, depending on actually it doesn't matter on your industry, but ACAS would be a good source of truth for dealing with these sort of situations. Obviously, there's tons of legislation that help employees and employment protections. We are going to experience changes in that in the UK with the new Employment Rights Bill that's currently being changed and manoeuvred and whatever else. We'll see what comes of that. There's needed to be increased protections within that from day one employment and stuff like that. There is protections for employees today with the current legislation. Redundancy is quite tightly regulated for the reasons for selecting an employee has to be typically not to do with performance and has to be a role reduction. They have to make it so that it's the position is at risk rather than confirmed redundant. So look, if your employer isn't following, or you don't think they're following correct procedural processes through any of these situations, then definitely that's something to bring to my attention, I guess. Performance improvement plans are a little bit more tricky, but basically they should be fair and reasonable, and they should follow a kind of a clear and objective process, albeit they're kind of the Wild West is strong, but they can. What typically happens is there's a best practice with performance improvement plans, but people are too afraid to challenge them and to push back, and that can be kind of something that I see quite regularly. So it's about kind of knowing what your rights are, and ACAS is a free resource for that. And then for what I would provide up and above that would be to make sure that they're following them correctly, and that you just feel confident dealing with these types of scenarios, right? And that you're appropriately preparing, and your confidence is not being tarnished while you're going through something like this.
Yeah, nice. So I think, without going to spiritual and woo-woo for a minute, a crisis could be a giant signpost to the life you really want, right? So my mum's other half, he's got this really great question that when anything goes wrong, when there's a crisis or some situation that causes shock or alarm, he asks himself this question: how can I turn this to my advantage? And it's such a powerful question because it's an instant sort of emotional and psychological pivot to look at the upside of this. And, there's gazillions of examples of people that have either been fired from a role, been through a redundancy process, or experienced some kind of toxicity, which meant they chose to leave. And then from that place, they were able to turn, an idea into something that became their main gig. So, starting a business and or finding a new role when you're experiencing crisis is kind of the exciting part of all of this, isn't it? It's forced change, and it's going to be a bit uncomfortable, but actually this could be a blessing in disguise. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think there's nothing more more motivating than being left with no choice. Obviously, we touched on it holistically in our last session. Ideally, you're looking at putting things in place ahead of time, and some people will do that, and it will make life easier. But doing it when something, the rug gets pulled from you, is also an opportunity. And it doesn't, I guess, necessarily mean that the next role or next avenue is the true north, right? So a lot of the times what I would do with my clients is that there will be a gap between the next employment that they reasonably can get, and they're going to do a job that they're kind of fairly happy with. They need the money. They don't have the war chest built up. But that's a great time to start to look at what the next role is. Like, what is the one that you truly want to do? And you really have to balance up between acting with urgency and keeping yourself supported financially, mostly, and taking whatever, sometimes whatever role or path is easiest. But use that crisis and use that as a catalyst for that change, at least beginning the steps to do that.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned to you before, having started a business in the evenings at weekends, having started a business by reducing my hours so that I had half the week in employment and half the week working on my business. And then the third option, which has happened more than once, which is the burn the boats option, not necessarily by choice. Any one of those three routes can lead to a really exciting next chapter. But I love your point that the next move isn't necessarily the move. So you don't necessarily need to be asking yourself, what do I need to do for the rest of my life? It's what do I need to do next that's going to be my next stepping stone to create the life that I want.
Yeah, it's I think you asked the question last episode about if you I'll butcher the phrasing, but if you were to wake up in the morning and to be in a role that is your ideal role, or ideal life potentially, what would that look like? What form would that take? How would you feel, etc.? If you can identify that, and if that's the only thing you do during that crisis, that would be an exercise worth doing.
Yeah.
And then what you can do is you can look at what's one step, or one or two steps that you can take in order to prepare yourself for the subsequent role. And we touched on it last time, but it's worth reiterating that in those inflection points, particularly if you're going through a situation which is taxing on yourself, it's important to try to hold yourself accountable. And the best way to do that is by getting someone else potentially to hold you accountable, if you're not able to do it yourself. So I would say that, when the new job comes, you put things in motion, and you're going to say, by X date, I'm going to have a first stepping stone done. You also mentioned about, in your own career trajectory, about being placed kind of at risk and then getting the promotion. I read a piece of research, going back a couple of years now, that the psychological damage to employees is actually sometimes more pronounced for the people that get to stay. Because if you actually think about it, when you're made redundant, everything changes. Everything changes. You're into something new. You're probably in fight or flight. You're exploring. It's a little bit exciting. It's a bit terrifying, but you're kind of in motion. For the people who are left behind, they go through the exact same daily life, potentially, or most likely, but their colleagues aren't there anymore. The people that they've worked with alongside for potentially years are not there anymore. Things have changed for them, but it's also kind of the same. And that sense of uncertainty can be really rocking for a career. So it doesn't actually necessarily mean that you're made redundant or anything. Typically, nothing bad could have happened to you. But if you're in a scenario like that, that's also a time to start checking your options. Even if you are redeployed, you have to use that as a catalyst too.
Mark, thank you for reminding me that I was psychologically damaged from that process.
I thought that was very apparent, Simon.
I love it. Well, look, I think if I was to sort of summarize this bit of the conversation here, that just because there's a crisis, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. But regulating yourself, stepping back from the emotion of it, looking at the facts and saying, okay, how can I turn this to my advantage? What are my options? What do I need to do based on managing this crisis? And but also, what do I do next? Knowing that a crisis has happened, so I need to respond to that and think about what my next move is. So, folks, anyone that's watching or listening to this, you have three options, and we've got three really cool options for you. The first option is you can book an appointment to have a conversation with Career Buddy, with Mark or one of his team, and they will help you with your career transition questions. They will help you manage a crisis. They've got lots of skills and expertise to help you figure out your next move. Option number two is if those of you that are thinking about a side hustle or a main hustle, maybe you want to top up your emergency fund by making sales, or maybe you want to transition to the dream of running your own business that you've been hanging on to for years, you can join the Rebel School. The courses are completely free. Go to therebelschool.com/events, join a course, and we will take you through every step from starting a business without spending any money through to making your first sale, building websites, social media, understanding the tax and legal stuff and running your own business, and so much more. Option three, look, if you go, look, I'm not ready to transition my career and I'm not ready to start a business, we've got something else for you. We've got a community that we're building, which is a Career Buddy and Rebel Business School community. And in that community will be access to ideas, insights, training, podcasts, videos to help you manage your career and learn the skills and take the tools and techniques that you need to become the CEO of your own career. Any final thoughts from you, Mark?
No, look, Simon, that's been great. And if you are watching this and you need some, even if it isn't a crisis and you need some support to take some of the weight off your current situation, just to explore what you want to do next, please feel free to reach out to me. And every time I hear the joint partnership we're having with Rebel to build this community, I get exceedingly excited and really, really thrilled that we're able to pull this together, and it should be a really, really valuable resource. And if you do want to start your own business, I would highly recommend getting in touch with the guys at Rebel. So yeah, thanks so much for having me again, and yeah, best of luck out there.